Hi, I'm Brett Blacker and I'm the CEO of English Australia. My pleasure to be with you today to present the outcomes of the quarterly market ELICOS Insight Survey for Q4 2021. I'll be joined today by Svetlana Cruz, who's the Senior Research Manager for Bonard, who many of you in contributing to the survey would have dealt with Svetlana throughout the process over the past year as well. Today's presentation, what we aim to cover will be, first of all, in terms of the format, what I will do is provide you with an overview of the December 2021 student visa data. And I'll just pull up the outline for the webinar here. And secondly, we'll then go through that, sorry. Before I do, I'll just give a quick plug and thanks to our sponsors. I do need to acknowledge the Department of Education, Skills and Employment and the great work that they do into supporting this research and their own data collection. We have had wonderful support from the department in terms of running the quarterly ELICOS survey, in addition to the annual ELICOS market survey, which looks at a whole range of other factors, and we'll be presenting that data middle of this year. Also, I'd like to thank Bonard, and as I acknowledged, Svetlana is a key member of that team, and Bonard's done a tremendous job working with each one of our participating institutions to try and ensure that the process is as seamless as possible for you, and for us, providing really high quality analysis as well. Next of all, a quick thank you to Allianz Global Assistance, once again, our supporter of this research and the presentation that we're delivering for you today. Now I'll provide the overview of the seminar itself, of which I will present the year-to-date December student visa data. So we, English Australia, release a monthly market report. What I will be providing is an overview of some of those key outcomes from the report. With the difference between that and the quarterly data, obviously we in ELICOS aim to try and deliver English programs to students on multiple visa types. Over the last year, and since the border has been closed, the predominant number of students has been here either completing studies on a student visa or indeed offshore. And so in this study, we've also been able to capture both the onshore student cohort as well as the offshore student cohort, which is a really valuable metrics. Again, we'll use our provider type analysis, which is something that we've implemented for a few years now to try and add to the usability of the data depending on your college type. If you're ELICOS-only, ELICOS into a vet-based provider, into private higher ed or to a university. And those metrics allow us to give more granularity in terms of the type of students that are studying by the various provider types. We will look at some unique metrics around the impact of COVID on employees, not just in terms of those that we've lost, but equally in terms of the business sentiment for providers that are now looking to rehire staff as we have applications coming back online and students re-enrolling as well. That will then be coupled with a sort of forecast prediction from participating colleges on anticipated booking levels and some of that consumer confidence that we're starting to see now with border reopening. And I'll finalize the presentation today with an update on some of the latest December 2021 student visa data, which is looking at some of the applications lodgements from our students that have not yet commenced their studies but are in the pipeline to do so. First of all, I just want to acknowledge here that this report, again, this is our second year of being able to do this report, thanks to the Department of Education, Skills and Employment. We aim to be able to deliver it as timely as possible, and this is something that we've seen throughout this year, being able to provide the complete market picture, the most comprehensive data and analysis specifically for the English language teaching sector, and being able to bring that to you at a much more rapid pace than we can when we do the annual collection. Each time we've looked at trying to bring in new insights into the data. And I think that in terms of some of those key elements of employee impact, the economic impact that we've seen and being able to quantify, it's certainly assisted in the research outcomes and advocacy that English Australia has been able to undertake on behalf of members and the sector. And really what I do want to note is we encourage all ELICOS, CRICOS institutions to participate. And for us, that greater pool of participating colleges supports the validity of the data and the research as well. So just moving on, I'm going to now give you an update on the student visa commencements. And in fact, I'll do a bit of a snapshot on the enrolment data for all sectors as well. What we can see here clearly in terms of both the enrolments and commencements has been the impact, particularly on the ELICOS sector. To put it into perspective, if we look at the enrolments picture first, we've seen enrolments from higher education decline year on year, year to date, so the full year December, down in enrolments of 13%, and corresponding for higher education down in enrolments of around 22%. The vet sector, which actually largely due to the onshore student continuation, was less impacted in both of the enrolments and commencements of all sectors. We have seen an enrolment decline of almost 6.5% in vet enrolments at the end of 2021, but a slightly larger decline, almost 16% down in the number of commencements. Jumping over, you can see schools was down around 33% in enrolments and about 55% in commencements. Now, with ELICOS, we have experienced the most significant decline of all sectors in the enrolment data, down almost 61% in enrolments. And with commencements, it's around 58% down in the commencing student cohort. Now, percentages can sometimes be misleading, but if I was to quantify that in just the numbers themselves, looking at enrolments, ELICOS dropped around 63,500 enrolments. Now, the closest other sector was obviously higher ed, and comparatively, ELICOS contributing at the moment around 6% of the total market, with higher ed contributing over 50% of the market in terms of market share. ELICOS declined 63,500, where higher education declined around 54,500. So you had essentially in that pool itself another 9,000 more student declines in enrolments from ELICOS than you did in the largest sector, with the second largest decline. And in the commencing pool, we've seen ELICOS commencements down 38,000 in terms of actual commencing students. In fact, 38,500 again. And in comparison to that data set, again, higher education, which is the largest decline, the second largest decline, I should say, declined at just over 30,000. And the vet sector, who now have the greatest market share, declined 25,000. So again, almost 9,000 students, just over 8,000 students, greater decline in ELICOS than any of the other sectors, even though our proportional share is much lower. If I look at that in terms of the year-to-date perspective, and what we saw because of the pipeline trend coming out of 2020 into 2021, the actual proportional declines were greater in those first few months, where they were largely shielded back in the 2020 year. So you can see the proportional declines that we saw January, February and March were the greatest proportional losses year to date. But in absolute terms, we've still seen that in December alone, the ELICOS sector in that month, just in compared to the month prior, was almost 50% down. And on that, we've seen a decline in those numbers, dropping from around 1,100 commencing student visa holders to around 550 commencing student visa holders. Just to note, the year prior, on the 2020 data, December had actually experienced a 76% decline in that month alone, which was the largest of all of the months for 2020. So we've had, I guess, over the 2 years, 76% decline on prior year, then now a further almost 50% decline on the year again. And I think that really puts it into real terms, just that the overall impact of the 2 years of border closures for us. Looking at it now in terms of some of the key source regions, obviously we're most impacted by those bigger regions, and so bigger states, I should say, bigger countries, with commencements from China decreasing just over 48% in that period. And again, what we did know is that even in terms of market share, China still made up around just over 22.5% of all of the market. To date, there's kind of concern, particularly from the ELICOS into university-based providers, who aren't necessarily seeing the proportional rebound for China that we would have necessarily anticipated. And I guess the concern is what that decline we've seen this year alone, the 48% decline this year. At the moment, the market isn't showing a vast increase coming into the first few months of 2022. A couple of the other markets, though, just to point out where we are. Colombia, again, down almost 68% in terms of absolute terms. We are seeing some student interest come back in, and consumer sentiment is picking up. Still down in that last period of December. It was almost 6,900 almost students coming through. And Brazil equally, the decline from Brazil, who pre-pandemic, China, Colombia, Brazil, in terms of market share order, fell another almost 73% here. I think I won't go through them all individually, but in terms of anecdotal evidence, we'll have a look in terms of some of the student visa coming through. But we are experiencing, particularly in the independent providers, are seeing some of the student returning from Latin America and student interest and bookings from Latin America, Thailand, Vietnam, and some unique ones, particularly from Saudi Arabia and Turkey, which are coming through year to date. On a state-by-state level, again, we kind of, some of the impacts here mask the overall declines. Particularly for Queensland, which we've discussed numerous times before, the volume of students from Queensland, which would typically have normally had about a 50% non-student visa market. And so the 62% down is only in the student visa cohort. In terms of the overall declines, it has made a somewhat bigger impact on New South Wales and Victoria. You can see by market share, New South Wales is still the largest, followed by Victoria, and then back up over into Queensland. These figures, I think, across the board, sort of looking around that sort of 50% decline up to the bigger ones, which almost 60% in Queensland and in Victoria and 62%. And that's where it averages out. And what we will do in the Bonnard section is do a comparison between the data we collected through the survey respondents compared to this Department of Education data as a comparison. So on that, what I will do is move on and hand over to my colleague from Bonnard to take us through the Q4 ELICOS market insight data.
Thank you, Brett, for that very comprehensive presentation of the DESA data for the ELICOS commencements and enrollments year-to-date December data. So moving on to the quarterly market insight survey itself for Q4 2021. I would like first to, of course, acknowledge and thank everyone of our participating colleges. For those who have been, your continued support is definitely very much appreciated from our end. So thank you so much. And for example, here what we have is for Q4 2021, we have 102 colleges participating for this edition. So historical comparisons that I will be providing are based on 94 colleges that provided their data for both Q4 2021 and Q4 2020. So here we can see that New South Wales continue to have the strongest representation for this quarter with 34 participating colleges. And this is followed by Queensland and Victoria. And then we have Western Australia with 9 participating colleges and South Australia for 6 participating colleges. So for Western Australia and South Australia, we can see here that they continue to have a stable representation for this edition. And just a quick overview as well of responding colleges based on their provider type. So we can see here that the strongest representation are from university-based colleges with 33 respondents, and this is followed by ELICOS, standalone ELICOS colleges with 32 responding colleges. So we can see here, it's just an important note from us that from 39 colleges in Q3 2021, for ELICOS standalone, we had 32 respondents for Q4 2021. So of course, it can change the sample size with our data analysis as well. And so here, what we have is the Q4 2021 data, total student numbers and student weeks. So this data, as Brett mentioned earlier, aggregates all ELICOS students, regardless of their visa status and study location. So we have here all visa types, onshore and offshore students. And here we can see that there's a 47% decline for Q4 2021, both in student numbers and student weeks. So from 9,437 students in Q4 2020, it is down to 4,971 students, or almost 4,500 less enrollments for Q4 2021 compared to Q4 2020. With our visa breakdown, so we can see here that student visa holders continue to dominate the student cohort for the ELICOS sector with 82%, similar with its student weeks. And then we have our other visa with 17%. And as we previously mentioned with our past webinars, the other visa holds the second largest share, as it includes offshore students with no visa or those with pending visa application. So this is definitely going to be an interesting trend data analysis in the next quarters, seeing how the shift with other visa types will increase with the borders open. And here, going quickly with the booking sources. So commissionable bookings continue to be the preferred channel for students, with 84% of students booking through an agent. And then we have 16% with direct bookings with colleges. And as for study location, so this is one of the key elements of our report. We can see here, instruction methods. So we can see here that the importance of online delivery mode is still the preferred. It's still the majority of students with online delivery are studying in this mode. And we can see here that it has 75% of student cohort studying online. So if we compared it to Q3 2021, it actually increased because it was 73% in Q3 2021 when students are studying online. This is followed by face-to-face with 23%. And then we also have followed by 3% with a blended learning. And as mentioned earlier, so this is one of the key elements of our research, identifying the student study location during COVID, and of course here now with Q4 2021 and with borders reopening. So we can see here that more than half of the student population still continues to study offshore, with 56% reported studying outside Australia. And then we can see here with the remaining 44% studying in the country. And this is based on 72 providers who were able to break down their student study location. So if with the past quarters with our webinars, so we have been providing this trend development on a core sample. So here I would like to note that this is based on same providers who have been participating for Q1 from Q1 to Q4 2021. And this, of course, accounts for all visa types, including offshore students. So in order to identify what is the trend development, we have to determine based on this same cohort of providers. And as Brett presented earlier, so he was presenting about student visa data. And what we have here is students for all visa types, including offshore and onshore students, of course. So here we have a like-to-like comparison of same cohort with the ELICOS sector experiencing a 59% decline from its year-to-date December 2021. So since the start of the year, if we compare it to 2020, the overall performance of the sector, the increase actually was experienced in Q3 2021. So it saw a 5% quarter-over-quarter increase. So from Q2 to Q3, the sector experienced in that period at least 5% increase. So again, this is based on all 65 providers who have been participating in Q1 to Q4 2021 survey. And moving on to our state overview data. So we have here student numbers by state, looking at percentage-wise. The most severely affected state in the last quarter of 2021 was Queensland, with a decline of 62%. And then we have Victoria with 60%. If we look at absolute numbers, New South Wales noted the fewest enrollments with 1,737 students, comparing it to Q4 2020. And here we can see South Australia with the best performing state throughout 2021. Despite its decline of 36%, we can see here that so it is the best performing both in student numbers and student weeks. And just to note as well, Western Australia, so it experienced a 45% decline in Q4 2021 compared to Q4 2020. As for student weeks, Queensland also experienced the largest drop in terms of percentage change. So it experienced a 66% decline, while Victoria recorded the biggest decline in absolute numbers. So Victoria experienced a almost 16,000 less than student weeks for Q4 2021. And again, South Australia with the best performance in terms of student weeks. Looking into the average weekly tuition fee by state, so this is another key insight that we added this year. So here, of the 61 providers who reported the data, 35 charged the same tuition fee for onshore and offshore course delivery in Q4 2021. And then the remaining 26 colleges charged different fees for each system, with the biggest variation in onshore versus offshore fees in South Australia. The average weekly tuition fee charged by reporting providers for offshore delivery was 5% or $16 higher than the price of an onshore course. So again, this is based on 61 providers who specified their tuition fees for Q4 2021. And jumping into the state's top source markets. So here with New South Wales, the top 5 source countries for the state remains the same. We have China, Colombia, Brazil, Japan, and South Korea. So despite the 33% decrease of China for Q4 2021 comparing to Q4 2020, more than half of the student population of the ELICOS sector in New South Wales are from this source market. So we continue to see as well, as Brett previously also showed, Colombia, Brazil, Latin countries are experiencing more than 70% decline for Q4 2021, and this is evident in New South Wales. But on the other hand, the state still experienced some positive developments in their top 10 source markets, as they saw increases from Taiwan, Indonesia, and Hong Kong, albeit small for this quarter. And just to add another insight, another analysis for this webinar, what I would like to note is for New South Wales, for offshore students, as a key element of this research, 58% of students from New South Wales are actually studying offshore. So we can see here how important our offshore market has been for the sector and of course for New South Wales. This insight I will continue to provide for the next states as well, just for another analysis for our providers depending on their state. And for moving on to Queensland here, we can see here that its top source market is Japan. So Japan, coming from its 3rd spot in Q4 2020, it rose to the #1 spot, although with a decrease of 43%. Here we can see that Colombia, from 243 students in Q4 2020, it declined to 36 in Q4 2021. So Colombia experienced the biggest drop in terms of year-on-year change and in absolute numbers, and this is followed by Brazil. So again, 2 of our top source market from LATAM regions. And here for Pakistan, with increases, we also saw an increase with Pakistan. Again, a bit small, but any positive increases is of course very welcome in the sector. For Queensland, students studying offshore actually have a bigger share compared to New South Wales. So for Queensland, 82% of our students are studying offshore. And I also, of course, would like to note that these data in terms of onshore and offshore depends on being able to be identified by the responding colleges. So for Queensland, again, there's 82% of the student market are studying offshore. And moving into South Australia, the state student cohort continued to be dominated by the Asian market. We can see here that there's also increases from countries such as Japan, Philippines, and Vietnam. And we can also see here that China remains a top source market, wherein looking into the visa type of China in South Australia, 46% of its student population are under other visa type. And for its offshore market share of student cohort, 84% are studying offshore in South Australia. And we can attribute it perhaps with our students from China. For Victoria, Victoria's top 10 source market experienced varying performances. So you can see here with our LATAM source markets with Colombia and Brazil, again, experiencing the biggest drops. But you can see here with Japan, for example, with only a 16% decrease. But we also need to look at decreases in terms of absolute numbers, quantifying it. And for Victoria, China experienced the largest decrease with 813 less enrollments for Q4 2021, comparing it with Q4 2020. And again, looking at the offshore student cohort for Victoria, 69% of its students are studying outside Australia. And lastly, for Western Australia, looking at its top 5 source countries, it all remains the same: China, Colombia, Brazil, Taiwan, and Japan. China as its top source country with a decrease of only 2%. And it's actually 3 less enrollments for Q4 2021. And looking at Colombia here, the second top source market, in terms of absolute numbers, Colombia faced the biggest decline with almost 110 less enrollments year-on-year change. In terms of increases, Western Australia experienced it with Bhutan with 45% or 5 more students. But again, it's a bit small, but still an increase, of course, is very much welcome. For Western Australia's offshore students, 34%. So the smallest offshore student cohort experience is in Western Australia, wherein 34% are outside studying ELICOS for the state. And moving on into provider type analysis. So I would like to start with standalone ELICOS colleges, wherein it faced the second largest decrease in terms of absolute numbers, both in student numbers and weeks. So for Q4 2021, standalone ELICOS colleges experienced almost 2,000 less students if we compare it to Q4 2020. With standalone ELICOS colleges source markets, China replaced Colombia as its top source market, and Colombia with the biggest decline in absolute numbers with over 400 less enrollments from Q4 2020. So the decreases in our LATAM source markets are translated throughout the more than 70% decreases is translated throughout sectors, and of course with here, as we can see it with provider types as well. So looking as well into the increases, Indonesia experienced a 47% increase for standalone ELICOS colleges in Q4 2021. So we can see here from 36 students in Q4 2020, it had a 53 students in Q4 2021. And moving on to our university-based providers, university-based had the biggest decline in terms of absolute numbers, but nonetheless, it had the biggest market share in the ELICOS sector. So from 4,062 students in Q4 2020, university-based providers recorded 2,343 students in Q4 2021. And a big key insight for offshore students in university-based providers is that 95% of offshore of student cohort of university-based providers are actually based in outside the country, outside Australia. So again, it's 95% offshore students for university-based providers. And if we look at here with our source markets, we can see here that this provider type continues to rely on China, despite its 47% decline. And this is, I would relate this to what Brett mentioned earlier with Chinese students outside the country. So with, I would say the offshore students with the 95% can be associated with this source market. And if we look at this provider type based on its visa type, student visa holders for the Chinese students are actually 89% of the market. And on a positive note, for university-based, it also experienced some increases. So we can see here with Japan, Vietnam, and Pakistan for Q4 2021. For vet providers for this quarter, student numbers, it experienced almost a 37% decrease, and a better performance on its student weeks with almost 24%. So for student weeks in vet-based providers, they experienced more than 700 less students if we compare it to Q4 2020. As for its source market, LATAM countries continue to be the top source market for this provider type. So we can see here, Colombia and Brazil with 365 students for Q4 2021 and 152 students in Q4 2021 from Brazil. And if we compare the performance of these two countries across other provider types, this is actually the only provider type with that is below 50% with a decline for Q4 2021. We can also see here increases from Nepal and India, with Nepal with 62 students in Q4 2021 and with India for 40 students in Q4 2021. And just to go through quickly with our other provider types with multi-sector and school-based providers, we can see here that multi-sector experienced a 48% decline in student numbers, and with its student weeks, a 55% decline. And for school-based providers, a much bigger decline with only 3 students for Q4 2021, and 16 with those 3 students with 16 weeks for Q4 2021. And moving on to another key segment of our quarterly reports, which is the impact of COVID-19 on employees. So here we have been continuing to provide you this element, this insight in terms of staff impact. And here for Q4 2021, the survey results shows that there's a 36% of ELICOS employees are working full-time in Q4 2021, while 12% were employed part-time and 52% were on seasonal contracts. So overall, 69% of ELICOS staff continued to work under the usual working arrangements during the 4th quarter of the year, and 20% of reporting colleges, 20% reported the loss in jobs for Q4 2021. Seasonal workers, again, if we compared with the previous quarters, They are the most affected, with 23% of them being released in Q4 2021. This data is based on 64 colleges who were able to provide their employee impact data. And here, just going too quickly with the full-time staff as well, 72% continued to work without any change to their working arrangements, and 8% saw their working hours or salary reduced, and a further 14% for full-time staff were released. And as Brett earlier highlighted, we added a new section. So coming from the impact of COVID-19 to staff, we are seeing, of course, some changes with border openings, with the rebound of students, is the hiring plans for 2022. So as we provide you the updated market trend and insight for the sector, we added this just to provide you on what are the plans of ELICOS colleges in terms of their staff for this year. And for positions planned for new hires in 2022, based on 52 providers who provided their hiring plans, 38% are planning to hire language teachers in 2022, 38%, followed by administrative staff with 24%, which usually will be working in accounting, technology, and operations. Some colleges separately shared with us that they are also considering hiring students, staff who would actually take care of students, so such as student care and accommodation officers. So definitely, this is part of some of the colleges, how the importance of student care, student services as they return to the country. And looking into number of employees planned to be hired in 2022. So again, based on 52 colleges who provided their hiring plans for this year, 35% of them plan to hire at least 1 to 3 employees in 2022, while 32% of them plan to hire 47 employees. And this is similar with those, or the rest of the respondents also shared that they are planning to hire more than 7 employees. So part of the survey is we asked colleges to quantify if they are planning to hire more than 7 employees and if they can quantify that. And although there were some challenges from colleges, as this may change throughout the year, of course, the 32% responding colleges for this part at least identified 160 new employees that are needed for 2022. And moving into anticipated booking levels, so understanding future demand, projected recovery by the ELICOS colleges. So here, the data is based on bookings as of December 2021. So for Q1 to Q2 2022, responding colleges have noted that they anticipate over 5,500 incoming students in Q1 2022, with a gradual increase also expected in Q2 2022. So if you look at quarter over quarter change, the responding colleges anticipated a 16% increase from Q1 2022 to Q2 2022. And looking into detail into the projection of student return for this year. So if we look at Q1 2021 versus Q1 2022, at Q1 2022, colleges will probably anticipating around a 1% decrease for Q1 2022. But in this note, I would like to highlight that the Q1 2021 data that we are using here, which is from our quarterly reports as well, are based on 98 institutions with a historical comparison from 84 colleges. And here, what I am showing you on the slides are based on 67 colleges. So it's definitely not a like-to-like comparison for the projection, but it's an indication of the possibility or the performance of the sector for the first 2 quarters in 2022. And for Q2 2021 versus Q2 2022, looking at the comparison, the year-on-year change, there's a projection of a 72% increase from Q2 2021 to 2022. And again, this is not a like-to-like comparison, since the Q2 2021 data is based from 91 colleges providing their data. And while here, this is based on 67 colleges. So again, this is definitely an indication. And we can see here with Q1 2022, with a reasonable pipeline as borders are still reopening. And we can see the uptake for Q2 2022, which is a stronger return compared to the first quarter in 2022. And so I would like to invite Brett again for the December 2021 visa data.
Thank you, Svetlana. Thank you very much for that really comprehensive overview of the data for the Q4 ELICOS Market Insight Survey. And additionally, the analysis that you provided, particularly in terms of the volumes of students that were studying online and offshore. Those are the really unique insights that aren't available through other data sources, and I think really represent some of the value that we've been able to gain through this survey. Equally, I think in this last wave, not just having the employee impact, but looking at the hiring plans, that's really encouraging, and particularly to see that strong interest now around re-engaging with our teachers and all those other critical support staff that need to come back online to assist with the recovery and growth and rebound for the sector. I think it's worth noting that you, in that last section, again, highlighted some really key aspects of forward planning. Noting that this anticipated Q1, whilst rather minor in terms of the adjustment on the prior year, with the backdrop of the proportional declines we've had, that's still, I think a positive position. It does show that the markets are being cultivated and we're starting to see the pipelines come back. And remembering that borders were only starting to be reopened in December of last year, so we're only really just starting to see the impact coming through once the logistics around the student visas, all of the other flights and things that need to be arranged to get a student on shore. What really is encouraging, though, I think, is that quarter-to-quarter comparison with Q2. What I'll do now is just cover some of the student visa data, which hopefully will be the catalyst to providing and fueling that growth, particularly in the Q2 period, which we're not far from entering, to see what that looks like. So this data here is representative of Department of Home Affairs data, student visa data only, and again, it's for the year-to-date December period. First of all, similar to at the start of the presentation, just looking at all sectors, what's encouraging here, particularly across all sectors, is to note that we've actually seen a grant rate increase, particularly across the whole sector piece. So when you aggregate all of the subsectors here, it shows an increase of around 5,300 visa grants, which is up 34% in grants on where we were December 2020. That's really positive and certainly something that I think we should recognise. We still have ground to make up on where we were in 2019. And so between that 2019 period to 2020, we saw a decline of around 11,300. So, we've still got some market position to make up from 2019 levels, but certainly it is really positive to think that where we were at from December 2020, we've seen a 34% growth overall. Really, in some ways, it's kind of different via the different sectors, and you can see this on the chart that's on the screen now. In terms of sort of looking at the individual sectors, the vet sector itself in December, so looking at the December 2020 versus December 2029, it's down around 10%. Now, that in itself is across what we've seen in the last 10-year average. So not just over the last 2 years. And taking that into perspective, whilst obviously negative, I think it does still provide a good platform for recovery and can be turned around relatively quickly with appropriate strategies in place. Schools and non-award were certainly much improved over the prior period, albeit from relatively small bases, making up around 26% of the population and 8% of the population respectively between non-award and schools. But I think what is worth acknowledging here is the higher education sector. And we saw, I think, and if I'm not mistaken, the highest grant growth period on record for a December, which included in that period itself a jump of around 5% in the onshore application group, but a massive 76% growth in offshore grants. Now that's, again, really encouraging. Do need to preface there could be some distortion between some of the grants of continuing students, which we aren't unable to fully unpack. But regardless, that grant rate for the arrivals that we're seeing in terms of the number of current arrivals, particularly coming back to universities, would be in that data. And equally, students that have studied online offshore and potentially done their ELICOS programs online offshore could be part of that cohort in terms of the offshore higher education. Drilling down just on the next slide, what I'm going to do is show you the independent ELICOS. So taking what we've had in that last data set, looking at over a more longitudinal period and just focusing on the independent ELICOS. I do need to preface that in the previous slide, obviously independent ELICOS are those that are ELICOS-only. If they are coming to study on a pathway package to higher education or vet, the ELICOS student could also be captured in those other cohorts. Here, what we've seen is independent ELICOS for the months were down, coming up into down in 2020 by 80%. So we were down 80% compared to the prior year in 2019. But encouragingly, we've actually seen a jump. And here, whilst it's off a very low base now, it only represents a couple hundred students different in that December period. It is an encouraging sign for leading into the later quarters of this year and potentially to Svetlana's last slide, what we may see now in terms of a recovery in Q2 by the time that those remaining logistics come into place. But the big thing there again was in the offshore grants, and offshore grants were up. Offshore grants were up by around 450 grants overall, and that was an 82% growth in grants. So some positive signs and some reason for optimism that we're seeing in the early turnaround of the grant rate. Looking at this just in terms of what's been lodged monthly, on the next slide, I'll show there's the compared to our on the monthly one. I'm just moving forward. The monthly slide hopefully you can read it across the bottom. This is the graph that we've internally called the smiley face, because we're actually starting to see the smile come up on the other side of the graph, and rather big increase in the total number of independent ELICOS lodged visas, and that pipeline now starting to turn back on again. Just in terms of comparison, so this compares back to 2019, so pre-COVID data. We've seen for the month alone around 45% of that cohort. So 2019 was essentially, December 2019 was a record year for independent visa ELICOS lodgements, and December 2021 was 45% back to that starting position. Again, market cultivation, I'm still saying it's too early to see the green shoots, but the market's really being cultivated, and the lodgements are a testament to that at this stage. Finally, I'll look at it via a state level and just give you a bit of the segmenting of the independent only data via a state level. Here, I guess what it shows is that the market's kind of being distributed rather consistently to what it was, again, in terms of pre-COVID levels. Here, the largest volumes seem to be following the patterns of New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria, WA, SA, ACT, NT, TAS in terms of the volumes, consistent again in terms of those market shares and pre-COVID levels. In terms of the recovery piece itself, I think that what is worth noting is Victoria has managed to make up the largest ground and back to sort of 60% of their pre-COVID 2019 lodgements. New South Wales, 44% back, and Queensland is equally or just under about 41% back. Unfortunately, WA, those borders remained closed during December and therefore only slightly improved on 2020, and WA remained largely down on 2019 at about 70% down. That's going to wrap up the visa section. Just a few insights. Once again, a quick note of thanks to Allianz, our supporter and sponsor, and a great supporter of the work of English Australia. Thank you to their support. A range of technical and digital solutions that will assist the complete student experience here in Australia. And we do have some contact details I'll just give to you now if you'd like to follow up with any of the colleagues directly from Allianz. From us, that's now, I would like to, in my final closing, give one last thanks to Department of Education, Skills and Employment. This is our last formal webinar for this data series. We hope to be able to continue on with the quarterly survey. It's been made possible by the Department of Education, Skills and Employment funding, but the data and all of the work is really a credit to all of the participating institutions. So a real heartfelt thanks to you, all of those colleges that contributed as part of this data collection process. Hopefully the reporting has been of value to you. And again, the analysis and advocacy that we've been able to use from this survey project. And we'd love to be able to continue to do so. So please watch this space. Thanks to Bonnard, Svetlana and the team for their complete professionalism throughout each one of the quarterly data collections and presentations. The first class in everything that they do as a research agency. The report is going to be distributed. So for all of the participating institutions, I believe later on this afternoon, or certainly this shortly, we will distribute your copy of the participating report as well. That's it for today. Thanks to all of those that have come along live and or enjoying the recording at another stage. So signing off, thank you and all the best.